Guys, what's up?
Hi.
Well, what's happening? It's Doc John, and here I am with Ginger Bailey, an expert on obesity and weight management, weight loss specifically. She is a registered dietitian and also a board certified specialist in obesity and weight management. And then obviously, I'm Doc John, and I'm a physical therapist. And today we are talking about how to lose 80 pounds without giving up sweets or other foods that you love and crave. So Ginger, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll dive in.
Awesome. Well, I've been a dietitian for about 16 years now. I really love what I do. I love seeing changes in people's lives. I started working at a local hospital here in Salt Lake and did that for 8 to 9 years, and finally decided it was time to start a private practice. So that's what I've been doing for the last quite a few years at this point. So I help with a lot of different types of things, but I would say weight loss is probably the biggest.
Gotcha. And when we were talking, you said that most of the clients that come to see you actually want to lose like 50 to 80 pounds. But like that's kind of like daunting, right? Like that's a long-term process. That's something that takes a lot of effort. So how do you help people who are trying to lose that much weight, like get started, but also be consistent over that time period?
Yeah, that's a good question. I found kind of the secret to that is taking kind of an intuitive eating approach. It does a lot of things. It helps repair people's relationship with food. It helps them to be able to still enjoy and eat a lot of the things that they like, but also just overall create better patterns. And that's really the key to both healthy and sustainable weight loss, because you can lose weight doing lots of crazy diets and things like that. But a lot of times that weight doesn't stay off. And so people end up just regaining it plus an extra 10 pounds. And then they do the next diet, and then the next thing happens. We call it yo-yo dieting.
Gotcha.
It becomes very unhealthy for people, and it makes people really miserable too in the process.
Right. That's like people I work with weight loss as an online coach. Like a lot of the time it's like, here we go again, like we're trying another thing, and they're telling me all the diets they've been on and how discouraged they've been. Now you've mentioned something called intuitive eating, and this is something I've been learning about recently, and it was very different actually than what I thought it was at first, because I thought intuitive eating was, like I have memories of my mom being like holding up a food and being like, does my body want this or not? Kind of intuitive eating. And so like that. And then I was like, so I always want a cookie, like, and like, so that didn't really like make sense to me how people could like lose weight on this intuitive eating. So maybe you can shed some light on what intuitive eating is.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I do think a lot of people don't understand intuitive eating very well. And that's why I think a lot of people think it doesn't work. But intuitive eating really is the concept of mindfulness applied to food specifically.
Mm.
But the beautiful thing is when you learn this, it helps you to regain your connection with your body, with yourself. And that's something that can then translate into so many different areas of your life. What it truly does is help you to understand better what your body actually needs and when it needs it. So that's really the key, not just to weight loss, but to a lot of things, and to having good health is being able to hear those body cues and have your body say, hey, I need this, give me this specific thing, and you being able to recognize it and respond to it.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
good
no, I think
intuitive eating is that.
yeah, exactly. I think you like summed that up pretty well, is like paying attention to those body cues, right? And especially like I feel like one of the things in today's society is we're like so busy and distraction is so available. Whether in the form of our phones, TV, even just being a busy parent like yourself, who're taking care of your kids, like it can be a challenge to be aware of those cues. So do you have any like tips for people who maybe are a little bit out of touch with their hunger pains?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people are actually very out of touch with their bodies because, like you said, we are so busy and we get taught just to push, push, push and be able to accomplish all these great things. And while that does have a place for sure, it's not necessarily helpful in us taking care of ourselves and our own health and our own bodies. And so a lot of times what I recommend is the idea of being so mindful with yourself all the time feels just overwhelming at first.
Mm.
So I often recommend pick one meal that you're like, this is going to be my mindful meal today. And I'm going to put away all the distractions and I'm going to try to just get rid of everything else. And I'm just going to be with my food for at least this one meal. And I find if people can do that, then they start to develop the skills that then translate naturally into other eating times.
Nice. I like that. And also like specifically taking it into like a small bite-sized piece, if you will, to use a pun in this case of like just, yes, basically taking the time to be present with your food, present with your body and eat. And actually, when I started doing this myself, I actually found like mealtime was actually like something to look forward to. Because I
Yes.
grew up in a home where like food was fuel. That was kind of our motto. And so it was like just about packing it in. You like, even I can look back in high school and anytime I was having breakfast, I was also working on like SAT and ACT questions to get ready for exams. And so like I had learned to basically be distracted from my eating from like a very early age, I guess you could say, because my parents wanted me to survive and do well in school and actually thrive. But yeah, like slowing it down, being present with your food and eating, it's like, oh, this is actually really enjoyable. And it's not like, what did I just inhale? It's more like you actually took the time to appreciate and enjoy the food.
It's true. When you're really present with eating, it's amazing how much it changes the experience. It's interesting as you start to do that, you start to realize how much you've missed for so long. Like there's so much subtle nuance in flavor and taste and all these things that you could have been appreciating, you didn't. The beautiful thing is I find that when people start doing this, they start to recognize when they're present with their eating, they don't have to eat as much of the food to feel satiated.
Mm.
And that's such a beautiful realization I see people come to is they realize I don't have to eat as much and I still really enjoyed my meal. I loved it. I felt good afterwards. And I love seeing that shift for people because
Yeah.
food should be enjoyable, right? We should enjoy what we eat, but the more present we are about it, the more we will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like how you said that, right? Like the more present we are, like it actually fills that need, right? Because we know that like eating is in part there's like emotional needs for eating as well, and eating actual foods, not just being on like shakes all day or food replacement kind of
Yeah.
things. Um, but like what you just said made me think of like the fact that sometimes we want to have like that feeling of satiation, say if that's like it needs to be 100, and if we're distracted because our brain is now focusing on two things, it's kind of like we only hit that like 50 or that 60, and so we keep consuming food just trying to like send that signal to our brain, and tend to overeat in that case. So
Exactly.
what other like we talk about the purpose of this podcast being people to lose up to 80 pounds without giving up their favorite foods, and just how like intuitive eating can be a very effective tool for actually enjoying that food and maybe not even overeating some of those sweets. What would you say are some of your other like top tips that you give as a dietitian to your clients, to help them in this process of losing that weight?
So, another piece I think that the intuitive eating can do for you is that it actually helps you find that true satiated point. So, not that full point where now you're actually starting to feel uncomfortable and now you don't really want to do things and you're kind of hitting that food coma, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
There's a point before that where if you check in with yourself, you'll find you're not hungry anymore. All those hunger pangs have kind of subsided, but you're also not full. It's kind of that point I say you can get up and walk away and feel like now I can go do something and I can go tackle life.
Mm.
So, but it's really subtle. And so if we're not paying attention, it's so easy to miss. And
Mhm.
here's the magic is that that's where those extra calories come in that throw people's systems out of balance. And that's a big reason why they're gaining weight, because
Mm.
just consuming that extra 5 to 10% that they didn't really need wasn't really increasing their satisfaction or satiation. Now it's just adding extra weight and it's doing nothing else positive.
Mhm.
And so by paying attention and slowing down and really looking for what I call the Goldilocks zone, right?
Yeah.
I'm just right.
Yeah.
It's amazing how people just end up starting to cut out naturally those extra calories they never needed in the first place and they don't miss.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point of like that 5 to 10% extra, right? And like one meal, sure, that's not like a big deal, and maybe even one day isn't that big of a deal, but where it becomes like a consistent chronic thing, it just snowballs, right? And then the weight just keeps going up on the scale, and then people are like trying to avoid the scale and don't
Mhm.
want to even know what's going on there because it can bring on that like anxiety and fear of basically being out of control, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think the key there is that it's kind of a subtlety in that like self control, because it's not like the self control of like white knuckling and being like, I just have willpower to do this. It's like a different type of control where it's like you're conscious, you're focused, you're aware, and because of that, you can make a better decision, right?
Yeah,
And
I like to use the term intentional, that you're
mhm,
making an intentional decision. So I think the other beautiful thing that intuitive eating does is it helps you to make intentional decisions with food, not restrictive ones.
mhm.
So, like the whole dieting culture mentality has just taught people there's good foods and bad foods, and you can't eat any of the bad foods, which are usually the ones that people like, right?
Right, right.
So that's a problem, right? And the reality is you don't need to be restrictive, but you do want to be intentional and make what you're eating actually worth it to you.
Right, absolutely. And like I totally agree with that 100%. One of my newer clients recently was telling me just about how like there's so much misinformation out there in the good foods and bad foods, and people saying things like, there's a sugar in carrots. Well, carrots are a carb, right? But and this like so my client wouldn't even like touch carrots because they're
Yep.
scared of carrots are a bad food. And that was actually like one of the first things we worked on as a mindset shift, is like there's no bad
Mhm.
foods, there's just foods that may support your goals and your health better than other foods, or more directly.
Yeah. So I often teach people this concept of nutrient density and that nutrient density matters. So if you think of, the concept of density just as a science principle, it's mass for volume, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we apply this to nutrition, what it's really meaning is how much good nutrition or good vitamins and minerals and beneficial things are you getting out of that food for the calories that are contained, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
the energy that you're consuming. So if you're consuming too many foods that have a lot of energy but not a lot of nutrients, that's a problem because now your body's not getting everything that it needs,
Kind of
right?
like the empty calories term, right?
Yeah. So that's like kind of empty calories is sort of referring to those foods that have, if they're very low nutrient dense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and frankly, there's not tons and tons of foods that fall in this group. There's a few. Like I would say soda is one of those foods I consider not nutritive, right? It
Mm-hmm.
contains a
Yeah.
lot of energy and zero positive nutritional value. So that's one of my foods that I say, if this is a food, if you want to cut it out of your diet altogether, it actually will be to your benefit because it doesn't provide any nutritional value. So even cheesecake, we don't think of cheesecake as being like, this, we don't eat it as a superfood or a super nutrient dense food, but at least it has some protein and calcium and some other minerals. There's actually is still some nutritional benefit to cheesecake. Something like soda contains zero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much just like sugar and flavoring and water, right?
It's,
Is
yeah, really the main issue is that nothing in it is naturally occurring
mm-hmm.
in regular or diet soda, right? There's really nothing in there naturally occurring. There's nothing in there that really provides your body any beneficial aspect.
Hmm.
And there's been lots of studies done showing the detrimental effects of regularly consuming it. So it's one of the few foods that I say are my blacklist foods
Gotcha. Gotcha.
that are really they're just not necessary, right? They're not a necessary part of a healthy diet.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't mean that you can't ever have them, but they are foods that I say you need to be very judicious with because they're the foods that aren't providing any positive benefit to your system.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a simple thing somebody could do if they were just trying to have like one simple thing they could do to start decreasing that caloric load or intake is just to cut out soda. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think about like 0 calorie sodas or that kind of stuff where, it's like it's a flavoring based thing, but I've seen some research and some arguments back and forth, and some groups are saying like, yeah, they're fine, there's no calories, and other groups are saying like, no, it actually can still contribute to weight gain. What's your thought and expertise on that?
Yeah, good question. So I will say I've seen some fairly convincing studies showing that diet sodas or those 0 calorie drinks aren't any less harmful to your system than regular soda is. And I think there's good reasons for that. Even with the diet stuff, it goes back to the same thing with soda is there's nothing naturally occurring. One of the, I think, basic things I've learned from years of doing this is that our system doesn't do well with unnatural things. Our bodies don't have the pathways to process unnatural substances. And so most of those are containing things that are not naturally occurring. And so I think that's where you get those negative things coming from, really, is the fact that you're consuming something that was never really meant to be consumed in the first place. There's also, I think, a decent body of evidence showing that even carbonation in of
Hmm.
itself isn't really good for you. So a lot of times what I'll recommend instead for people is if they're like, I can't just drink straight water. I hear this a lot. And I totally understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
Even sometimes I don't want to, and I actually like water. Some of my favorite little tricks is doing like an herbal tea. Either hot or cold doesn't really matter so much, but ones that don't really contain caffeine. Some of those can be really nice and tasty and just break things up. But
Mhm.
a lot of herbs actually have health benefits. So at least now you're drinking something that's not straight water, but is actually potentially giving you good health benefits from that.
Mm.
Another thing can be even adding just a tiny bit of some essential oils, like lemon's kind of a nice one.
Mhm.
Like even 1 drop of lemon essential oil in like a whole liter of water is enough to give it some really nice flavor. But now you're not getting the acid, you're not getting sugar, but now it's not just straight water. And lemon's actually very good for digestion, anyways.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, I like that of like kind of choosing healthy options for like your flavor, for your
Yeah.
water and things that your body has already been designed and built to digest, right? And digest effectively. Not to say
Yes.
that you couldn't digest other things that your body's not necessarily built for, but just that it's a longer, harder process that, it's tougher on the body, right? Um,
Yeah.
so you brought up caffeine, and I know we talked before. As one of the things you recommend people don't do is to have like wake up and have coffee first thing in the morning before they have their breakfast. Could you break that down for us in terms of like why that is it coffee specifically or just caffeine in general and what happens?
Yeah. So that's also a good question. And this is something I get asked about frequently and work with a lot of people on. So the problem with if you get up and have some coffee and then just go and you don't eat breakfast, when you wake up for the day, you're already in a deficit. So I often use the analogy of like a car. It's not
Hmm.
even like you're starting your day on 0 gallons of gas. You're starting your day on -5 to -6 gallons of gas because you burned through energy when you slept at night. So now expecting your car to go on a road trip with -5 gallons of gas in the tank, and then what the coffee and caffeine is doing is flooring the gas pedal of the car with negative fuel in the tank. This
Mm.
is really hard on your system. And this is a wonderful way to wear out your adrenal system.
Gotcha.
So people do this because they're like, oh, I'm tired. I don't have time for breakfast. I slept bad, right? I just want to feel awake. The problem is caffeine is not actually energy. All it's doing is upregulating your adrenal system, which again now has no energy to function with. And it has -5 gallons of energy to function with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how much people know about cars. My dad was a car guy. So if you constantly run your car with almost no gas in the tank, it actually kills your fuel pump.
Mm,
So guess what? The same thing happens to the body.
gotcha.
So it's really hard on people's systems. And that's why they end up crashing later. And then they're binging everything right before bed.
Gotcha. And so this would be like good advice for the people who like only have coffee on their way out the door to work or whatnot, and then are just waiting to eat till lunch or later. And then because that system's just been, throttled, they have such a deficit that then tend to overcompensate and then eat
Yes.
way more calories at lunch than they need to. And then you're setting up the afternoon crash, right? From the huge influx of everything they've eaten, and now your body being like diverting all resources to gut digestion, and then they're like, all right, time for the next coffee at 2 or 3, right?
Yeah. So what I frequently see a lot, and I would say this is the number one thing people are doing poorly, and that's why they're having issues with their weight, is that they wake up, just drink coffee or caffeine to get them going for the day, don't eat breakfast, barely eat lunch, then binge dinner, then want to eat sugar all night, and then try to go to sleep. But now they can't sleep well because now what they did is try to hit the gas and the brake at the same time, right? They
Mm-hmm.
put all this high energy fuel in the system, but now they have to shut down and try to go to sleep. So what happens? They sleep really poorly, wake up, feel tired, and cycle repeats. I actually named it. I call it the vicious cycle of awfulness.
I love it. The vicious cycle of awfulness. That's great.
Because it
Oh
results
man.
in nothing but awfulness.
Yeah, well, and like you said, like a lot of people are kind of living on this. It is a vicious cycle, right? It's like you're constantly relying upon an external factor to keep you going,
Yes.
right? And then you're also affecting your sleep because you can't sleep. If you can't sleep, you can't recover well. I know there's studies out there that basically show that if you have poor sleep, your ability to lose weight decreases as well. Like you can't burn fat as well. So yeah, I would totally agree. I'd call it the vicious cycle of awfulness as well,
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
just it's really damaging to your system. And so what's happening too from a metabolic standpoint is now your body is being starved all day and then getting overfed. Because what's happening, then your body's like, I don't want to be starved anymore. So it hits the override switch, and that's why you want to eat everything in the kitchen sink. Because now
Mm-hmm.
it's trying to create a buffer for the next time it gets starved. Right. So people are like, I'm not eating that much. I don't understand how I'm gaining weight. And I break it down for them and I explain it's because your body's starving all day or getting overfed. So it's never in a space that it wants to actually let go of anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the primary issue. So it's not even just about the amount of calories you consume in a day. It's probably even more important when those calories are consumed.
Gotcha. And meaning like starting the morning with breakfast is typically a
Yes.
good idea because you've just been asleep for 6 to 8 hours without food. You're in a caloric deficit at that point because you've burned through all your available blood sugar, or
Mhm.
at least most of it. And then you're like, okay, now we got to replenish, right?
Exactly. Actually, breakfast in my house is 100% mandatory. I don't let people go anywhere or do anything until they've eaten breakfast, and I'm very hardcore about this rule.
Gotcha. So I know like intermittent fasting has been something that's been like really popular, especially like popular among like Hollywood stars, and a lot of people have kind of picked up on that. I know you've got things out there like Kino Body where intermittent fasting and weightlifting 2 to 3 times a week will get you the Hollywood body is kind of their thing. And so what are your thoughts just kind of on intermittent fasting in general as a practice, and in general just for like the average person looking to lose weight?
Yeah, so this is also that's a great question. This is something I get asked about all the time. So I think this concept of not eating too many calories too late at night does make sense because then your body really can't go into that rest mode. It can't really shut down properly. You don't get into those deeper stages of sleep. People can have nightmares, right? So I do think trying to avoid eating, especially a lot of heavy food and especially high carb food late at
Mm,
nighttime, is an important thing. That is something that I do recommend. However, waiting hours and hours in the morning before you eat something makes zero sense to me. That's metabolically, again, super bad for the body because it needs fuel to function with. And when you force it to try to function without fuel, it's damaging to your system. So, can intermittent fasting result in weight loss? The answer is yes. Does that make it a good idea? No. Hard no. So a lot of people that have done intermittent fasting in the past then super struggle to lose weight in the future. And most people's bodies after a time, they're like, nope, you're not doing this to me anymore. I can't keep doing this. This isn't good for me. And people find themselves, and people would find the same thing, frankly, with the keto diet. They'd hit a point and they're like, I wanted to keep doing it, but I couldn't do it anymore. And I was like, that was your body telling you no. That was your body saying, no, I don't like this. This isn't good. Right. So I think this is a very important discrimination. There are effective ways at losing weight, right? But what matters more are two very key factors is number one, is it safe? And is it going to be sustainable? Yeah. And the problem with intermittent fasting is it doesn't hit either of those criteria.
Yeah, I know from just, I've done some intermittent fasting in the past myself, and I've also like had some people I know who've done it, and it's interesting because going that long with food can lead to a lot of other like side effects, like severe nausea, like the moment you start eating again, when your body's kind of switched over to a starvation period of just like really struggling to take any food, passing out. You've got the struggles of dealing with making sure you maintain good electrolyte balance while you're intermittent fasting. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely hard on the system, and probably for the average person, it's not necessarily the best idea. Like you said, sustainability is probably not in the cards for a way of life with it, potentially.
Yeah. So. I think too, my other big issue with it, and this also, I think, applies to other types of diets as well. But if your body is telling you, I need food, and you're ignoring it, that's a problem. Our systems work very much on a feedback system, right? So like breastfeeding is a great example of this, actually. So the more milk the baby drinks, the more milk the mother produces, right? It's a feedback system. So this is also why intuitive eating is so important, because intuitive eating helps improve the feedback system, right? That usually dieting destroys. So what it's doing is it's when your body says, hey, I need this, and you respond and give it that, then it's like, oh, cool, you listened to me. And so then in the future, it's going to want to give you more signals because it knows that you will listen to it. Right.
Kind of like your body wants to feel seen and heard by you, right? Just like how children in development need to be seen and heard, and adults for good social and mental health need to be seen and heard as well, right?
Correct, right? So our conscious mind is meant to be able to recognize those signals that our system is giving us so that our needs get met, right? This is why we get hunger signals, because that's our body telling us, I'm out of energy, I need more energy. Right?
Yeah.
And so when we don't listen to the signals that our body gives us, it's a problem. So again, can people lose weight doing diets and ignoring it? Sure. But this is why it's damaging their system.
Gotcha.
Because they're not giving their system what it needs at the right time. And so now the system is scrambling and trying to compensate for the fact that they're not getting what they need.
And so essentially it becomes like another form of yo-yo dieting, right? Because it becomes unsustainable over time. And then you're back into dealing with, overeating, extra eating, etc. One of the things that we previously talked about is the importance of like building a better physical profile, and how like for a lot of people, when they start moving into a caloric deficit, there can be this tendency to also move less, in which case muscle mass starts to go down. So maybe you can elaborate on kind of like the importance of just like movement, exercise in regards to also being on a weight loss plan.
Yeah, so this is great because this ties in, I think, also to this. So, right, in order to actually lose weight, you do have to create an energy deficit, right? But you do want to be very cautious about how you do that. Because if you try to create too extreme of one, especially too quickly, you trigger the body's compensatory mechanisms. So this is the piece that a lot of people don't get taught about and don't understand, is they don't understand how the body tries to compensate, right? So for most of humanity, starvation has been the biggest issue,
Hmm.
right? And so it's genetically programmed mainly to prevent starvation,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to
right?
starve
So
because then there goes the human race.
exactly, right? So that's what a lot of those compensatory mechanisms are there for, is to prevent starvation, right? And so what if, again, you can't get to food? What if there's an emergency and something happens and you can't get to food, right? Just like the car analogy, right? The reason that our bodies can manage to keep functioning even when we don't eat breakfast and don't fuel the system is, unlike a car that doesn't have a built-in compensatory mechanism, our body does, right? So our
Hmm.
body figures out how to keep us from passing out and dying, right? Which is what would happen if it didn't have those built-in mechanisms, right?
Hmm.
So what happens on, I guess, a physiological level is if our body says, "Hey, I'm hungry, feed me." What's usually happening is the blood sugar level has dipped to a point that it could get dangerously low. So our body starts to give us hunger signals to say, "Hey, give me more fuel." If we ignore it though, that blood sugar level is going to continue to decrease as we continue to burn through energy.
Hmm.
So this is what our liver is for. Our liver is our failsafe. Our liver basically is able to store and release sugar into the bloodstream in the case of this emergency, right? Of
Hmm.
not getting fuel in the system. So it can kick sugar into the bloodstream. That sugar then gets taken into the cells. It keeps us going for a bit, right?
Hmm.
But then it can't store that much energy. So by the time, if we keep going and don't eat, then it kind of goes into like real danger mode. And that's when you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm starving." And now you want to eat all the things because your body's screaming at you and saying, "The liver can't fix this again. You have to eat something. If you don't eat something, we're in big trouble."
The liver's tapped out. The bank is empty.
Yes. Yes. Right. So, but what if the person still ignores this, right? And
Yeah,
still
or
doesn't
can't
eat?
get food, right?
Right. This is when muscle tissue starts to get broken down to be converted into sugar as emergency energy.
Hmm.
So when people create too large of these deficits, especially at the beginning, the body is going to start to just chew through muscle mass to use as energy. And that's generally counterproductive to what people are trying to do,
Hmm.
right? Because that
Hmm.
muscle is what actually helps us to burn through a lot of extra calories and a lot of extra fuel, right? So if you're now tearing down your muscle tissue to use as energy, this becomes a problem.
Right, and we know that fat takes up 3 times the space muscle does, but then muscle is also 4 times more metabolically active. So essentially, fat can just kind of sit and laze around, if you will,
Yeah.
in your system. It's not super active, so it's gonna hang out. Whereas you'll have a higher metabolic rate, basically meaning more calories consumed by your body just to function each day per more muscle mass you have, right?
Exactly. So like if you're creating these huge deficits, right, not feeding yourself when you need to be, that's when the body is then being forced to compensate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that compensatory mode is also your stranded on a desert island starvation mode, right?
Right, right. Let's keep the liver alive. Let's keep the kidneys alive. Let's keep the brain alive, the heart alive, the lungs, everything you need to actually exist, and start taking it from things that you have maybe you could get by with, right?
Right. So the problem is the body is genetically programmed to not lose weight in compensatory mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it literally does not know the difference between "I just didn't eat breakfast and I'm stranded on a desert island."
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know why it's not getting fuel. It just knows that it's not getting enough fuel and it starts to freak out. And so it's like, "Oh, we better hold on to everything. We don't know when we're getting fuel again." Right. So that's a problem. So this is why I teach people that are trying to lose weight. It's okay to create a deficit, but a 300 to 500 calorie deficit is frankly the most appropriate. If you
Mm-hmm.
get to be more than a 300 to 500 calorie deficit, it generally is going to start to cause more problems. It's more likely to trigger those compensatory mechanisms. It's more likely to especially affect your energy level to the point you actually can't move as much.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
again, counterproductive, right?
Right. Yeah. And you're saying that's a 300 to 500 calorie deficit per day, right?
Right. For
Yeah.
the whole day,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So if people are like going through the day, and again, now they're in a 1,500 calorie deficit, and then maybe by the end of the day, they end up in a 300 to 500 calorie, but they spent most of the day in 1,000, 1,500 calorie deficit. They still kept their body in compensatory mode. And that was not only did they not feel good, but that was really counterproductive to what they were trying to accomplish.
Right. And so for our people that don't love to count calories, but rather just want to step on the scale, 300 to 500 calories of loss is, up like 500 calories for 7 days. That's 3,500 calories. That's 1 pound of fat loss a week, right?
Correct.
I'm not sure what 300, 2,100, I don't know, like 3/4 of a pound, somewhere in there.
Yeah, so typically, a 500 calorie deficit per day will result in 1 pound of weight loss a week. A 750 calorie deficit is about a pound and a half, and
Mm-hmm.
1,000 calorie deficit per day can result in 2 pounds of weight loss a week.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, what I say are the realistic and healthy rate of weight loss for men is usually 1 to 2 pounds a week. For
Mm-hmm.
women, I'm sorry, but it's really only a half a pound to a pound a week,
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha.
just by the math alone.
Right, right. So with that in mind, as we've been talking, for people who want to lose 80 pounds, you know, basically you're telling them that if they were to have zero setbacks, to do it in the healthy kind of most efficient way and have it be actually fat loss and not like a combination of muscle, bone, other things as well, that they need to plan like a year and a half minimum, but with setbacks, with trips, with like vacations and parties and stuff, that could potentially be 2 to 3 years of a process, right?
Yeah, I would say realistically, it is a 2 to 3 year process because, especially at the beginning, your body is going to have to go through some readjustments. And a lot of times, I don't see significant weight loss occur right away, which
Mm-hmm.
is very hard for people a lot of the time. But it is more important that people work to change the patterns that have gotten them into the place they're in the first place. But changing patterns isn't really very easy. In many cases,
Mm-hmm.
we have
Yeah.
our habits. It takes time to break habits. And furthermore, it takes time to build the skills that are necessary. Eating is a complex process, right? It involves we've got to plan meals. We have to go grocery shopping. We have to get the food home. We have to put the food away. We have to then prepare the
Prepare
food.
the
We have to
food.
then clean up the mess after we've done that,
You
right?
got to be mindful with your food. You got to make sure not to
Right,
overeat. You got to make sure that
right.
when people give you free handouts of food, whether you're going to say yes, no, or thank you, and I'm pass this on, there's a lot of
Yeah.
different skills to practice around food.
Right. And so it takes time to build those skills, right? If somebody's starting to play the piano, you don't go straight to Mozart,
Yeah,
right? You learn
yeah.
how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
But then eventually, if you keep working on those skills, you can play Mozart, right?
Hmm.
Or Beethoven, who's one of my favorites. But people have to be patient with themselves, right? But what I found is my people that are willing to work with me, my people that are willing to actually do the work, do that upfront investment, and really fix the issues that they have been having for years with eating, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, they're usually not the ones that are just dropping 30 pounds in 2 months, but
Hmm.
they are the ones that a year or two out have actually made their goals and are happy and they feel good and everything is awesome, right?
Hmm.
So this is like, honestly, like good, sustainable, healthy weight loss is an investment.
Hmm.
And there's no way around that. But you know what? Most anything else in life that we do that we probably put value on
Hmm.
requires investment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And your health, right? Like your health is your wealth. And I know when I was in Japan, like the healthiest country in the world, it's considered, right? People live the longest. They're typically the most active because they ride their bikes or walk everywhere after they get off the train. And they have like a really healthy diet. And all the time as I was meeting people, I'd ask them, like, what's a really important thing to you, or what's a priority to you, as I was interviewing people. And, probably half the time people said, my health. My health is my priority. And I think we'd be hard pressed here in the States to hear people say that. A lot of people might say, oh, making a ton of money is my priority. You get some people that say family, which is great too. But like, you have to take care of you to be the best you for your family, right? Like we talked about with the vicious cycle of awfulness, is it probably also leaves you feeling pretty awful. And then you can't be your best for your family, for your friends, and you may not have the extra energy to be involved in a community. And that simply comes back to your nutritional habits that you've learned, or have been taught to you somewhere, that aren't actually supporting the lifestyle you want.
Yeah, that right there is the crux of it, right? That's, at the end of the day, that's why it's such a sad thing to me to see people live that way, because you really can't live up to your full potential. You can't be as functional. You can't be as happy. You can't do as many amazing things if your system is constantly lacking things, and it's constantly just having to try to compensate for not having had enough sleep, not having the right fuel at the right time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just can't function the way you would otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best thing to me, the thing that really makes me love doing my job, is that, generally speaking, after the first visit I have with people, people come back to me always and say, you know what, you were right. I have so much more energy. I feel better. I can function better. I think clearer at work. I'm not crashing mid-afternoon. Like, I can do things that I couldn't do before.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see already. So even when, for those people, a lot of them haven't even necessarily lost a significant amount of weight, but
Yeah.
that
But
quickly their
they're,
health is improving.
yeah, they're feeling better. Their focus is better. They have energy. They
Yes.
can be more involved with their families. They're
Yes.
less irritable, right? So there's
Yeah.
less, just strife in their life, less emotional stress. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
awesome. So we're getting here to where we should probably wrap up. So just as like a summary, people who want to lose up to 80 pounds without giving up their sweets, probably start by getting into intuitive eating, right? Being fully present with your meal, at least one meal a day, and kind of starting to build that skill set there. Getting off of sodas, right? Getting off of liquid calories. Would be another huge one, to just cut out stuff that doesn't really give you a lot of nutritional value, but gives you a lot of calories is another second one. And then we talked about not drinking coffee first thing in the morning, or any a lot of caffeine, and then just heading out the door, because you're putting the throttle on the system, but then you're not actually putting in gas in the tank for that system to go. And then you're crashing with the vicious cycle of awfulness, getting back on more caffeine in the afternoon, not sleeping well at night, and just repeating the cycle and feeling pretty miserable, as just kind of a few of the tips, right? And then if you are cutting hard, right, like you're trying to lose weight fast, you might actually be cutting into other systems of your body, eating up your muscle mass, which decreases your metabolism, which then makes it harder to lose weight down the road, harder to lose fat. And so we have had a lot of awesome tips and expertise here from Ginger. And we are so, I feel so enriched through this conversation, just because it's awesome to talk to somebody who's like, yeah, I've been doing this, almost 2 decades, I'll be around the corner, and I know what I'm doing. People get results. So Ginger, if people want to reach out to you, to consult you as their dietitian, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I do have a website. It's saltlakenutricoaching.com. I also have an amazing assistant who's wonderful at answering phone calls, helping people get scheduled. I actually have 3 other dietitians that work for me as well, and they're also awesome. So even if I'm booked out further, I do have other people that can also work with, those especially wanting to lose weight. So the business line is 385 743-1211. People can also, they can send a message, they can text or call that line, which is really nice because I know if you're like me, making a phone call is not an easy task. So even a text is okay too. You can also find my page on Facebook or Instagram, also on there. And yeah, there's even so many other beautiful aspects of intuitive eating that we didn't even necessarily have time to get into today.
Absolutely, absolutely. That'll have to be another podcast for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have to do part 2.
Part 2. That's right. That's right. Awesome.
But we're happy to help people. I feel sad a lot when people have spent so many years struggling on their own, that, and it took so long for them to finally be brave enough to reach out to actually get some help. And I'm a firm believer that I think everybody should work with a dietitian because they're just not skills that we have taught people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Full-heartedly agree. Ginger's a fantastic dietitian. She's been my dietitian in the past, when I wanted to bulk up and look more manly for a bit, and also when I wanted to cut down so that I could actually see my muscles again. So I highly recommend working with her. She's fun. She knows her stuff, and you wouldn't go wrong having her on your team to help you be supported in your health goals and transform your life to a happier, more energized version of yourself. So thanks everybody for tuning in to this podcast, and look forward to hearing your comments. If you want more information, feel free to reach out and we'll get in touch with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for bringing me on and letting me come and talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely.